perfectly fine. But just wanted to make sure you guys didn't bump it or knock it over or anything, if you can help it.
No problem.
Good
I'll
morning,
sit way away
everybody.
from it, so I'm a klutz, so.
I don't know how many of you know about the flipped classroom. Has anybody heard of that? Okay, I am trying to do some flipping in some of my classes, and so part of what I'm doing is videotaping what I'm going to talk about today so that the students in my Soci 228 can go on Moodle and watch the video. And then what we do in class is less lecture and more group work, sometimes we even cancel class and we're doing things outside of class. So trying to flip the classroom a little bit. There's a service learning component in my class, and we spend a lot of time in class working out how that service learning is playing out. So I want to model some of that. I also want to model universal design and instruction. Has anybody heard of that term, universal design? Universal design began in architecture with things like doors. Doors are designed for the average home, the average man in French. And you see I'm about 6 foot and I can come through this door rather easily. But if you are coming in a wheelchair, that door is a little bit narrow. If you were Professor Ross in the religion department, if anybody knew him, he had to duck when he came through the door. Architects said in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, why aren't we designing buildings and spaces so that anybody can come in and be comfortable and navigate? Therefore, you have elevators so people with mobility impairments can get to the second floor. Therefore, you have door openers. So even professors carrying an armload of books can use that and hit the door opener so they can get into the building. Well, universal design is caught on, and now when they build new buildings like Birdsong, the new dorm, the apartments, they have to incorporate universal design principles. But universal design in the classroom is a little bit different. It's designing instruction for all learners, including people with learning disabilities, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, including differentiating for gifted students. So what I want to talk to you about today is a concept called twice exceptionality. And I think twice exceptionality is really interesting. The abbreviation for it is 2E. Twice exceptionality stands for the coexistence of giftedness and disability at the same time. There have been studies that show, for example, a lot of students who are on the autism spectrum are also in the above average to superior IQ range. So they are twice exceptional. They are 2E. They are both exceptionally gifted and profoundly disabled in a way that impacts them in the classroom and in school. It might seem like this is just common sense, but following your outline, I want to tell you that this bucks the system. This goes against the grain historically a little bit. Historically, disability has been based on what are called deficit models. I have a friend, Tony, who is wheelchair bound, but what did I just say? Wheelchair bound. That sounds like you're prisoned, you're trapped. Instead, we say someone is a wheelchair user to make sure that we're implying that they're not limited somehow by that disability. But that very language that I just demonstrated is indicative of how for thousands of years of human history, disability has been understood with a deficit model. And this is so profoundly ingrained in our culture that, I wonder if there's a better marker.
Look at that bag right there.
Maybe green's got ink in it. It's so ingrained in our culture that our traditional definition of learning disability is it has to be a deficit between ability and achievement of at least 2 standard deviations. So in other words, your IQ scores predict that this is how good you'll be at math, but your actual performance on math tasks is significantly lower than that. An example would be dyslexia. You've got 120 IQ, which is above average. You're a smart kid, but your reading scores are awful. If that equals a certain statistical amount, typically 2 standard deviations from the norm on a norm test, that is a learning disability. But that also presupposes that everybody's scores are going to look like this, and they don't. People have variability even within their own skill set. And so deficit models have been used for thousands of years, and it's only recently that we've started to think about other definitions of learning disability. For example, you've heard the term response to intervention. There are now RTI definitions of learning disability that aren't based on your IQ or deficits. They are based on the fact you're having trouble with reading. And that's the thing that is the most important. These things are also based on what has traditionally been known as a medical model. The medical model has seen disability as being centered in the person. My friend Tony, who is paralyzed from the chest down, he graduated from Randolph-Macon College. He went to law school at UVA. He's a very successful person. But people always want to feel sorry for him because he's, in this predicament. And that is a traditional medical view of disability, that somehow it's a shortcoming within that person's physical body, within their mind, or within them as a person even. Sociology came along and actually did a lot of important work in this area and said, no, disability is more than just this physical difference, this thing that's in a person. It's more of a collectively understood norm. And what we think is normal can be changed. And so in this sense, disability is defined by the group, by the norm. And this has both advantages and disadvantages, just like the medical model does. But it has real implications for talking about twice exceptionality, because twice exceptionality presumes that there is no normal. No normal. We're all abnormal. We're all variable. We all have strengths and deficits. We all have our unique kind of profile. So these exclusive and dichotomous definitions of giftedness, for example, and disability have created some real problems. But think about what we've done over time. We've created schools just for people with disabilities. Here in Virginia, for 200 years, we've had the Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind. It's not 200 years, 1838, it will be like 175 years, something like that. And then we have schools that are so-called normal schools. They even use that term in the old days. They call them normal schools. Think about your high school. There were some classes that were for students with disabilities, and there were some classes that were mainstream for everybody, if you will. So we have this really complicated history of sorting people out and putting them in one place, separating them into another. But the theory of twice exceptionality challenges that notion. It says maybe disability and ability are two sides of the same coin. And we can't talk about one without talking about the other. And that's complicated, because doctors are going to have a hard time with that. Psychologists are going to have a hard time with that. Even sociologists are going to want to focus on this norming, this imaginary person who's the Hollywood perfect celeb body, clothes, and all of that. So the next point I want to make is that as some of you will be future teachers, a lot of you will have children that will go through the public schools. And so the reality of the human experience that you will find in education and that you will find in your life, I think, is that things are not black and white. You will have good days, you will have bad days. Some days you will be more disabled than other days. I've heard students around here say, I'm sorry, Dr. Trammell, I forgot our appointment. My ADD is really acting up today. I sort of understand what that means, because we all are more or less disabled in many different ways every day. The most obvious example you could point out might be a football player who gets a concussion. They are temporarily disabled, and in theory that gets better over a week or two, and then they return somewhat to normal. Now, in reality, we know that concussions have kind of serious implications for the long term too. But the point being that we're all more or less disabled or enabled in different ways every day, all the time. And to think of ourselves as either we're disabled or we're not disabled is just not the reality of the human experience. And as a matter of fact, some people like the scholars Doris Zams and her sister Frida Zams, they say if we all live long enough, we're all going to be disabled. So we might as well just get used to the idea. So part of this realization that this is the reality of human experience is associated with postmodernism, which is sort of a complicated term. But I just want to mention briefly that postmodernism was a reaction to the medical model that said we can understand everything about